Gojo Satoru's defense functions as a strict physical anomaly governed by classical calculus and convergent series. This barrier represents a physical execution of an ancient mathematical puzzle, Zeno's paradox. In the paradox of Achilles and the tortoise, reaching a target requires crossing half the distance, then half of the remaining distance, then half of that. Continuously dividing space into smaller geometric fractions, 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, creates an infinite sequence of steps. This position versus time graph maps that subdivision onto physical reality. The straight line represents a constant velocity trajectory moving toward a fixed target boundary. Applying infinite geometric subdivision warps the trajectory into an asymptotic curve. The object slows, approaching the limit forever without making contact. Calculus proves you can approach a limit infinitely without touching it, but algebraic limits fail to explain the mechanical warping of localized space required to achieve this in 3 dimensions. Flat space mathematics are insufficient to explain a localized, impenetrable spatial barrier. Mapping this kind of curved space requires the theoretical framework of general relativity. General relativity treats space-time as a physical fabric that can be folded, stretched, and measured. The problem lies in scaling, creating a pocket of space that stretches an infinite physical distance out of a finite local area. To define the limitless technique, we must construct a custom metric tensor to mathematically encode those coordinates. Treating this ability as a rigorous physics problem allows us to derive the geometry of an engineered event horizon. The Pythagorean theorem fails when space is no longer flat. This 4x4 matrix is the metric tensor. It encodes local spatial curvature, with the 0 index representing time and indices 1 through 3 representing spatial axes. This equation uses the tensor to calculate displacement. The critical component is G11, the radial distance scaling factor. It determines the physical distance required to move closer to the center. We can compare this to the Schwarzschild metric, the standard tensor used to model the curvature of a black hole. At a black hole's event horizon, the G11 scaling factor mathematically blows up to infinity. From the perspective of an outside observer, this infinite scaling forces an object to take an infinite amount of time to cross the threshold. While a black hole models the time dilation and infinite distance effects, it also exerts massive gravitational pull, making it a flawed model for a neutral defensive shield. A functional Gojo metric must slow incoming targets while exerting 0 gravitational suction and ignoring distant objects. We satisfy these conditions by replacing the Schwarzschild G11 factor with a bespoke squared function centered on the barrier radius. To test the validity of this space, we rely on geodesics, the paths objects follow when traveling through curved space. The geodesic equation predicts exactly how an object will move through this constructed metric. We can observe the results by running the Gojo metric and the geodesic equation through a physics simulation. The initial simulation shows that while direct attacks stop, objects with tangential velocity are still drawn towards the center. Correcting this requires multiplying the angular metric component by a neutralizing function, f of r. Mastering this space requires exact angular corrections to avoid generating accidental gravity. With the angular momentum neutralized, the metric behaves as a pure defensive barrier. This simulation tracks an off-center trajectory. The particle hits an invisible outer boundary, the deflection radius, and routes smoothly around the center. Because of the angular correction, off-center objects are curved away by the altered spacetime. Physics change when an object approaches with a perfectly centered trajectory. A perfectly centered object pierces the deflection radius, but comes to an abrupt halt at the inner barrier. At this coordinate, the G11 scaling factor forces distance to infinity, requiring infinite time to cross the mathematical boundary. By defining this specific spatial geometry, we can derive an Einstein tensor that describes the exact configuration of energy needed to warp the vacuum into a non-attractive spatial shield. This spatial manipulation also has aggressive offensive applications. Lapse blue enforces a negative distance value in a local area. The universe corrects this physical anomaly by compelling local space to implode. Reversal, red, injects positive energy into the metric to force infinite divergence, violently repelling space. The collision of infinite implosion and infinite divergence creates a unique physics problem. This collision produces hollow purple, a spatial singularity containing virtual mass. In theoretical physics, particles with imaginary mass, like tachyons, possess a negative squared mass. This instability allows for the concept of virtual mass, matter that behaves as if it has density while existing only as a mathematical fluctuation in a decaying field. This technique does not destroy matter with kinetic force. It creates a mathematical glitch that deletes the physical space the matter occupies. While the Gojo metric is mathematically sound, a human brain cannot render these metric tensor calculations in real time. The 6 eyes function as a biological, atomic-level supercomputer. Reading energy flows at the subatomic level provides the computational efficiency required to calculate space-time curves continuously. This efficiency drops the energy cost of maintaining the spatial metric to effectively 0. The strength of the technique isolates the user, as they exist within a mathematically segregated space-time metric. The ceiling of this universe relies on pure processing power, mastering the mathematics of space-time to become an untouchable physical anomaly.